Hey guys, so we're officially over 10,000 subscribers, which is just totally crazy to me, and I really can't thank you guys enough for subscribing and for supporting this channel. To celebrate, I thought it would be really fun to do a Q&A video so that my viewers can get to know me a little bit better. This video is going to be very different for me because I don't usually get very personal on my channel, so this is a bit out of my comfort zone. But I do have a drink on hand. I'm drinking a Truly. That's my go-to alcoholic beverage. I also have this little 10 that I picked up from the party store to stand for 10,000 subscribers. Got some gold glitter on my eyeballs, and I'm wearing a really cozy sweatshirt that has dogs shooting lasers out of their eyes. So I think this is gonna go well. I've got quite a few questions to answer, and fair warning, this video is probably gonna be pretty long. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions. If you had to join one MLM, which would it be? Okay, this is an interesting question. So I'm gonna have to say that I joined an MLM where I would rescue 5 dogs and then recruit someone under me who would also rescue 5 dogs. And then they would recruit someone under them to rescue 5 dogs. And eventually all the shelter dogs in the entire world would have homes. Honestly, I can't give a serious answer to this question because there would be so many things that I would do before I would join an MLM, so it's just not in the realm of possibility for me. Congrats on 10K. My question is, how old is your little darling Puggles? I decided Puggles should be here to answer this question about him. I actually got a fair amount of questions about Puggles, so I'm going to hopefully address them all with this answer. Puggles is 5 years old. We adopted him about 3.5, maybe 4 years ago from the Austin Pug Rescue. Drew and I really wanted to get a dog, and we specifically wanted to get a pug because they're like really good lap dogs. Because at the time, Drew and I were working like really different work schedules. This was right around the time Drew had first started his channel, so he was still working a day job, and he didn't get off of work until like after 10 p.m. I got off of work around 5, so I had several hours at home alone, and it was just kind of depressing just sitting around by myself in an empty apartment. So Drew got Puggles for me so I would have some company. And Puggles is the absolute best companion. I remember the day we adopted Puggles and I saw him for the first time, I immediately started crying because I just knew then and there that he was the perfect dog for us. Someone also had asked how we got the name Puggles. So Drew and I were initially thinking of naming him Puddles, because on the first day we had him, he went into our closet and peed on my wedding dress. But we weren't really that for sure on Puddles, and then my mom actually suggested the name Puggles, and we really liked that name, and that's what he ended up with. It's actually quite fitting because growing up, my mom always came up with the best names for our pets, and she would always end up naming them, so this kind of carries on that tradition. What are 3 things on your bucket list? Number 1 is definitely skydiving. I've always wanted to skydive, but for some reason, I haven't taken the plunge yet. Number 2 is to travel to some specific countries. There's certain countries that I haven't been to yet that I really, really want to go to at least once in my lifetime, because I have friends that are either from or live in these countries. The countries are Germany, Ghana, and Sri Lanka. My 3rd bucket list item is to write a book. I don't know exactly what I would want to write about yet, but I really do love to write, and it's always been something that I've thought of doing. Can you talk about your aviation experience? I find that so interesting. My husband is a private pilot. I also had several people ask about my experience in aviation, so I'll try to give you guys the synopsis. This is probably going to take me a while to explain. When I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to do something in aviation, so I decided to go to this super small college that, despite being small, it's really known for their aviation program. I initially majored in professional flight and air traffic management because I either wanted to be an airline pilot or an air traffic controller. And I ended up not doing either of those things. So I stuck with the professional flight part of my degree for a bit and got my private pilot's license. But then after learning more about the just harsh realities of airline life, I decided it just wasn't for me. I really enjoyed flying for fun, but honestly, working for the airlines can really suck, especially for your first couple of years, because a lot of the time you're working these really crappy shifts. Obviously, you're away from home a lot, and it can be really rough on your body. So I switched my major to just air traffic management, and I really loved it a lot. And actually, in my senior year, I started working as a tutor for several aviation classes, and I was also a lab assistant for tower and radar labs. I had the full intention of graduating and then applying for the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City, but at the end of my senior year, I decided to tack on an aircraft dispatcher certification course, just because why not? And I actually fell absolutely in love with it. For those who don't know, an aircraft dispatcher is responsible for doing basically all the flight planning. So they do things like plan the aircraft's route, they check NOTAMs, which are airport or airspace restrictions. They check the weather, calculate aircraft performance and weight and balance, and then they also monitor the aircraft while it's in flight. A lot of people don't really know that when airline pilots clock in for duty, all of this planning stuff has already been done by a dispatcher. The pilots are responsible for going over the dispatcher's plan and making sure it's doable and safe, and then it's their job to execute that plan. So anyway, I fell in love with dispatching, and while I was still in the process of getting my dispatch license, I found out about a small startup airline that was looking to hire dispatchers, and they were also open to hiring dispatchers without experience. I applied, I interviewed 2 or 3 times, and then was offered the job a week or 2 after I finished my dispatch course. And then I literally moved to a new city 3 days later after they offered me the job to start working for them. It was kind of a lot. Also, as I mentioned, they were a startup airline, and they actually hadn't received their airline certificate from the FAA yet. So when a company is looking to become an airline, they have to go through this very rigorous years-long certification process with the FAA before they can become an airline. And the company I was just hired by was still going through this process. Part of this certification process includes the FAA basically giving the company a series of hands-on tests. And this isn't just upper management being tested, the whole company was involved. And the testing consisted of these basically mock scenarios they call tabletops and proving runs. During the tabletops, the entire company, management, maintenance, pilots, dispatch, flight attendants, we all sat in a room together, and the FAA personnel would give us a bunch of these mock scenarios that we had to figure out and handle. They were usually emergency situations. Then during proving runs, we would actually conduct a live flight without passengers, of course. And they would have FAA personnel sitting in the dispatch office. They would have one with the maintenance controller, one in the cockpit with the pilots, and one with the cabin crew. And they would basically give us mock scenarios that we would have to handle. And they were pretty extreme scenarios. I'm not sure how much I can talk about the specifics of the scenarios, but in many cases, it would actually require us to divert the aircraft mid-flight, which is just super fun. So yeah, not only was I just trying to learn the ropes of this job, but I was also representing the company in these testing scenarios with the FAA. And there were only 2 other dispatchers aside from me that worked for the company. So I was the dispatcher on duty for a lot of the tests. The company ended up getting their airline certificate, and I stayed working for them for a couple years after that. There were things that I absolutely loved about dispatching, and there were things that I didn't like so much. But ultimately, I decided to leave the company because Drew's activism was really starting to take off, and GM Skeptic was really becoming our family business, so to speak. Drew also started traveling around the world giving speeches and attending conferences, and we both felt it was important that I be able to travel with him for these things. Also, at the same time, I was working for the airline. I had also been helping Drew a lot with the research for his anti-MLM videos, and I really wanted to start doing my own anti-MLM activism, so having the time to do all of that was really becoming an issue. Anyway, that pretty much covers my aviation experience and career. I do really still love aviation, and maybe one day I'll go back to it, but for now, I'm really happy just to focus on my activism and on Drew's activism and on things that I think are really making a positive impact on the world. What are your career goals/dreams? Is YouTube it for you, or is there something else you want to pursue? I'm very happy working on my channel for now, but I have been thinking about going back to school. If you haven't noticed, I really love school and getting a degree in psychology, actually. I'm very interested in the psychology behind the human inclination toward cult behavior specifically. I'm always fascinated with how cult leaders are able to manipulate their followers' psyche, and I'm fascinated by the fragility and I guess you'd say moldability of the human mind. I think I would really like in the future to work with people who have left high demand groups, probably mostly with people who have left MLMs, and help them recover. And the best way I can think to do that would be to have an education in psychology. Aside from that, I would also really like to make a more direct impact with my anti-MLM activism and to especially take the anti-MLM movement to Washington to try and get policymakers to understand the harms the MLM industry causes and to hopefully get some laws changed here in the US so that MLMs are at least properly regulated or ideally banned. This is obviously a lofty goal and I still have a relatively small voice, but maybe one day myself and the anti-MLM community at large can make something like this happen. I've also started doing some freelance editing for another channel, and I've really enjoyed the editing because the writer for the channel is a clinical psychologist with a focus on evolutionary psychology. So I'm learning so much from editing his videos. What YouTube channels are you subscribed to? Okay, so I'm subscribed to a lot of channels. I actually broke them up into categories. So I'll just start off with the anti-MLM channels I watch. So for anti-MLM, obviously off the bat is Monica Sambita and Savvy Writes Books. They are definitely my ride or die. I actually was watching them for a long time before I started my own channel. And now all three of us are kind of like friends, which is kind of blowing my mind because I used to watch them like all the time. So the fact that we're friends is really, really cool. So other anti-MLM creators, Savannah Marie, she is such a sweetheart. The Recovering Hanbot, her videos are like so in-depth and so good. Obviously Illuminati, Amanda MC, and Margaret Angel. I think that's how you pronounce her name. But those are the main people that I watch. I subscribe to a lot of other people, but those are the main people. So for atheist, obviously GM Skeptic, and then also Cosmic Skeptic. In the science education category, I watch Star Talk. Star Talk is like my favorite podcast / YouTube channel out there. It's so good. Also Weird History Channel, Wendover Productions. They have a lot of really good videos about the airline industry. Then Joe Scott and SciShow Space. Then for veganism, Earthling Ed and Avant-Garde Vegan. And then in the travel category, I love watching Kara and Nate. Also the Budgeteers. That channel is so crazy because it's basically like these three friends who travel to a different country or different area of the world, and they have this like very limited budget, and so they're trying to travel and stay in places and eat for like this really strict budget. So it's really, really interesting. And then in the miscellaneous category, Fascinating Horror, Coffeezilla, and then Ask a Mortician. There's a bunch of other channels I'm subscribed to as well, but the ones I mentioned are the ones that I definitely watch the most often. I would love to know what your hair care routine is. Your curls always look so on point. Well, first of all, thank you. My hair is like so long. Like if I straighten it out, it's like crazy, crazy long. But I actually have a really low maintenance hair care routine. I primarily use just 2 products. Rule number 1 of having curly hair is to never brush it when it's dry. So I always fully wet my hair in the shower, apply like a lot of conditioner, and then detangle it with a brush. The conditioner I use is OGX Coconut Miracle Oil. They also have a formula that's specifically for curly hair, but I found that the Miracle Oil is a lot better for my hair. I really need conditioners that are pretty oily and hydrating because my hair is like really dry. I use shampoo very sparingly, and the shampoo I use is a medicated shampoo, so it's not interesting. I don't need to talk about it. After I get out of the shower, I immediately brush through my hair one more time, and then I apply a generous amount of hair gel. I use hair gel instead of like a cream or mousse because I've just found that my hair really requires a strong hold to prevent frizz. I use BioSilk Rock Hard Gel, and I kind of use like the Diva Curl method of like creating like a cast around my hair. Then I always let my hair air dry. I don't usually use a blow dryer, even with the diffuser attachment, because it just makes my hair frizzy. This question is actually from Savvy. She asks, what was your childhood like living abroad? I've mentioned it a couple times on my channel, but actually spent a large part of my childhood overseas in Indonesia. My family moved to Indonesia in 2004. My family spent a year living in like this really large metropolitan area of Indonesia where my parents attended language training. And then from there, we moved to a very, very small remote town. It was very remote. Like the only way in and out of the town was by airplane. There weren't any roads connecting it to any other major town. We lived there for a couple of years, but this town, unfortunately, it didn't have an international high school. So when it was time to go to high school, just my sister and I actually had to move to a different city that had an international school, and we both actually lived in a hostel. It was really difficult for me being away from my parents. I was only a sophomore in high school, so I was still pretty young to be away from them living in a hostel. So my parents ended up actually relocating to the city, and we lived there up until 2012 when I moved back to the US for college. It's hard for me to describe what living overseas was like or how it was different because for me, it was just normal. But I loved living overseas, and I'm honestly so glad my parents moved us there because I think the experience of living in a different culture and seeing so much of the world, it really shaped me into the person I am today. I think I had a lot of experiences that I don't think the average kid gets to experience, so I'm so grateful to my parents for that. I also got to make friends from all over the world, and many of them I'm still very close to this day. Since we all lived in sort of a more remote area of the world, we were kind of cut off from Western culture and from like Western media. We did have access to internet, but it was like super slow, and we didn't have like malls or movie theaters or any like typical places American teenagers like to hang out. So we really spent a lot of time outdoors, and we really had to make an effort to entertain ourselves. We did a lot of things like going to the beach, going to the river, hiking up to waterfalls, driving our motorcycles around the town because in Indonesia, the primary method of transportation is motorcycles. They don't really drive cars there. So yeah, we just kind of did a lot of things outdoors. Also, my high school experience was just really different than I guess the typical American experience. My school was super small. I actually graduated with 16 other people in my class. It was a very different experience, I guess, but honestly, it was all very normal to me, and I actually had a much harder time adjusting to the American culture when I came back to college. I think I had a hard time because American culture is much more individualistic versus Asian culture is more collectivist. Are you guys still vegan? And if so, how are you both finding it? Yes, we are still eating vegan, and it's going pretty well. We're lucky that we live in a city that has a lot of vegan options. It's super vegan friendly. We have a lot of fully vegan restaurants, and there's vegan options pretty much in all the grocery stores. I'm also really enjoying cooking a lot of vegan recipes, and I actually share these a lot on my Instagram. I also share anti-MLM stuff there too, so definitely check out my Instagram. Like, it's pretty cool. I mean, you guys don't have to follow it, but you should. But you don't have to, but you should. I went completely vegan a few months ago, but prior to that, I had been eating vegetarian. I think the fact that I ate vegetarian prior to going vegan made the transition a lot easier. I think that if you just go cold turkey, it can be a lot harder to stick to. I primarily eat vegan for ethical reasons. It was a change that I had been very seriously considering making for a long time, but I was finally pushed over the edge about a year ago. Almost 1 year ago exactly, Drew and I traveled to Tel Aviv, Israel, because Drew was actually scheduled to speak there at a conference on atheism. Drew spoke there, Amir spoke there, Thomas from Holy Kool-Aid spoke there, and then also Alex from Cosmic Skeptic spoke on veganism and animal rights. Alex's speech really solidified in my mind that I have a moral imperative to not consume animal products and not contribute to animal cruelty, and the day of his speech was the last day I had any meat. For me, I don't believe it's justifiable to allow another living entity that has a capacity to suffer or to be self-aware at some level. I don't think it's justifiable to allow them to suffer or to end their life prematurely, especially when we can get all the nutrients and dietary requirements we need from a plant-based diet. The abuses that happen to animals in factory farms are also pretty shocking and are unfortunately normalized. In some cases, like in the case of male chicks, we are literally bringing living things into the world only to kill them and discard them. In the egg industry, if a chick is born male, they are considered unwanted because they can't produce eggs and they aren't suitable for meat. So they are culled at just a few days old. We are literally bringing living things into the world only to kill them a few days after they're born because they're an inconvenience. I do want to give a trigger warning. I am going to go into some graphic details about how male chicks are discarded. So if you need to jump ahead, you can. I do encourage you to listen to what I'm going to say because I think it's important that we're aware of what's actually happening. In the United States, the primary method of culling male chicks is to grind them alive in a macerator. It does seem like we're close to putting an end to this practice with new technology that can actually tell the sex of the chick before it hatches, which is some good news, but for now it appears this is kind of the norm. This happens in the entire egg industry, free range and organic. This method of killing them and literally tearing their flesh from their bones while they're alive is a common practice. For those who don't know, if you're vegan, you don't eat meat, you don't consume any dairy, and you don't consume any eggs. A lot of vegans also don't consume honey. So any animal products. If you want to learn more about the ethics behind veganism, I highly suggest you check out Cosmic Skeptic's channel. I'll actually link his speech he gave in Tel Aviv in the description if anyone's interested in giving it a watch. So I normally do my sign-offs with Puggles, but Drew actually just went and took him on a walk, so it's just me. But thanks you guys so much for watching. I hope that I answered some of your questions. If you like this video, please subscribe, ring the bell, follow me on Twitter at the Antibot, consider pledging to my Patreon, and I'll see you on the next one.